Rome, America, with Richard Hoskins, is brought to you by America's Promise, with Ron Poach introducing the speaker. Here now is Ron Poach.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're really pleased to present to you this afternoon a Virginia gentleman. I say that in every aspect of the word. By the way, once I had a Yankee dog. Especially hated Virginia gentlemen. As a matter of fact, my dog's name was Lucky. Moved him down from Pennsylvania, down south, and this Virginian walked through the front door, and my wife had answered the door and welcomed him in. Lucky grabbed him by the leg and began to have a good time with his leg, and then came over and bit my wife. She complained to me and said, crazy dog, do something with that dog Lucky of yours. I said, what do you mean? Said, well, I can understand them being a Yankee dog, not liking Virginians, but he came over and bit me on the leg. I said, well, I can understand that. He was trying to get the bad taste out of his mouth. But we're really pleased to have with us a Virginia gentleman in every sense of the word. Dick Hoskins, would you come and share?
Thank you, sir. Before I get started, I got a story I want to tell you. The Vision Singers were up here just a second ago and doing a mighty fine job like they always did. But I was at another camp meeting not too long ago, and they'd been singing, doing another fine job, when they sat down, and her husband went over and spoke to her and said, honey, before we go home, we've got another engagement. I just found out about it just a minute ago. She said, oh, good. Where is it? And he said, it's out there in Kentucky, in the mountains there. She says, it is? She says, yes. He said, yes, it is. He said, now, of course, they're a little different there. And she kind of got a little suspicious, and she said, how different? And he says, they handle snakes out there. And she says, they do? And there was a silence there for a minute. And she said, what else? He said, well, I hate to tell you this, but they expect for you to participate. And she says, what do you mean participate? He says, well, while you're singing, you're supposed to hold up a snake in your hands. And she sat and thought about that a minute. I remember sitting there watching her, looking at her, and she suddenly said, no, indeed. She said, I'd like to sing for those people, but I'm not going to hold a snake over my head and sing. And, you know, I really don't blame her. I don't think I would either. Last night I was having supper, and I've got to tell you this. Pastor Fortner was at the table, and he was commenting about this Catholic friend of his who had become a Pentecostal. And then he had become an identity after going from a Catholic to a Pentecostal, and then he switched and became an identity. And then he became a tax protester, and then he changed his mind and decided to pay taxes. And I asked him, I said, what does his wife do? And he said, she divorced him. She divorced him. And, you know, I can sort of understand that, because that, you know, that's going from one extreme to another. Now, the things I'm going to talk about this afternoon, you selected. You filled in this list back here, and so I'll try to touch on each one of them just as the best I can and the time allotted for me. Since this country was founded, we have had 4 great inflations, and we have had 3 1929s. And I don't know, and I can't see the future, but if things happen in the future as they have in the past, I think we can expect another 1929 in due time. And the question always comes, when? Again, I have no earthly way of knowing, because I can't see into the future. However, judging from the past and the 50-year Jubilee cycle, just about 50 years, I should think that it would occur sometime between 1988 and 1992. Just one man's guess, but it's based on history, and I think it has some validity to it. The next question is, where does money come from? Now, this is important. A bank does not lend you someone else's money. It just doesn't happen that way. Now, clear your mind of everything and just pretend that there's no money in existence anywhere. And Dick Hoskins comes to town, and I set up a shingle that says, "Ye old trusty, fidelity, faithful Hoskins Bank." All right? And you need some money real bad for one reason or another. And you walk in the front door, and I'm smiling. I'm sitting at a desk, you see. And I'm smiling, and I stand up and I say, "How can I help you?" And you say you want some money. Now, this is how it's done. I said, "Okay, how much money you need?" "You need $10. What do you have for collateral?" "Well, I have a farm, I have a business, and I've got some cattle or whatever." I said, "All right, I'll tell you what you do. You sign this paper saying that you will pay me back $11, and I'll go back and give you $10. Now, I go in the back room, and I have a printing machine back there. And I print up a $10 bill, and I bring it out. It's still wet, see? And I hand it to you like that. And you say, "Thank you very much," and you go out and spend it. Now, where did that money come from? That money came from not somebody else. It didn't come from any money I was holding in reserve in my bank. That money was created by you. It was your IOU, it's your farm, it's your collateral that guaranteed that $10 bill. Now, when you come back in and pay me $10 against your collateral, it vanishes. And of course, since you agreed to pay 11, you've got a problem, because 11 don't exist, and that's part of the usury contract. But all money is created by the borrower. The borrower is servant to the lender. The law is sure. Always go by the law, always, and you'll keep yourself out of trouble. Don't try to understand people's discussions about economics. Most all economics books, economics classes, and discussions are designed to confuse. Money is very simple. It's very simple indeed. If there's no money in existence, you go into the bank, you pledge your collateral for money, you create the money. It's your creation. And when you pay it back, that money vanishes as if it never existed. Therefore, what happens if people in the United States pay off all their debts? If they paid off all the debts, all the money would vanish. We would have no money. It's a fraudulent system from beginning to end. This is where money comes from. It's very simple. Next question. How did usury operate in days of Rome? Now, please pay attention, because I want you to be able to tell everybody this. It's a simple story that your granddaddies all knew. But we are so busy now out trying to make a living and scratch our living for our families that we don't have time to study like our granddaddies used to. A Roman army was hired by a banker. Most all of your Roman generals were bankers. He hired that army for a period of time. He paid the army, it was his job to pay the army, with whatever he conquered, a portion of it. Then he levied tribute. Each one of these little phrases I'm trying to accentuate. He levied tribute. And people had to pay the tribute. And if he said, or they said, that they couldn't pay, the Roman army went in there and tore the guts out of the place, like Corinth. They tore it all to pieces. There wasn't one stone left on another. So when they went to the next city and told them to pay tribute, I don't care what the cost was, they paid tribute. In order to pay the tribute, since there was usually not enough money left, they had to borrow money into existence to pay for it. And who lent the money? The Roman general, who was the head of the army. Then, since the city had extreme difficulty, or the country had extreme difficulty in meeting the payments, Egypt had extreme difficulty, Sicily had extreme difficulty, Spain had extreme difficulty, North Africa, Phoenicia, had extreme difficulty. All of these nations had extreme difficulty, so they produced everything they could. They worked people day and night. They worked the animals. They worked the slaves in the fields and in the mines. They cut forest in order to pay the interest. And when you start throwing lumber on the market, what happens to the lumber market? Okay, you farmers, when you throw your wheat on the market and raise every acre that you possibly can raise in order to make the payments on your farm, what happens to your wheat market, your grain market? What happens to the copper and the silver markets? With all the rush of produce being thrown into the market to raise the money to pay the debts. Everything went down and down and down, and prices went down and down and down, and they collapsed all over the Roman Empire. What happened to the Roman farmers who had to compete with wheat coming in from Egypt, with wheat coming in from Sicily, with wheat coming in from North Africa by the shiploads, grain ships by the hundreds on the high seas? You couldn't give wheat away in the Roman Empire. And you, as a Roman farmer, how in the world could you possibly make a living raising wheat? How could you make the payments on your farm? You couldn't. You forfeited. They foreclosed. You went to town. The cities grew very large. The countryside was vacant. It grew up in trees and bushes where prosperous farms were. Come to Virginia. I'll take you into the woods and show you your plantations and trees, oak trees that have been growing 120 years. I can show you the rows where the firs, where the farmers used to plant their cotton and used to plant their corn. That's where our farms are, and the corporations own our plantations and our farms, as they will own yours tomorrow, just as in the day of Rome. The land was foreclosed. People moved to the city. But where were the jobs in the city? There were no jobs in the city. What happened? They went on relief. They went on the dole. There was plenty of wheat. It was all over the place. Turn it into bread. Small expense. Give it to the people. Everyone went to Rome and went on the dole. Free bread. The countryside was vacant. The farmers were useless mobs in the cities or had moved to the provinces. And one day, our granddaddies appeared. They appeared on the high seas in their Viking ships. And when we appear on the seas, we were looking for grain ships. We were looking for ships. We were looking for cities. We were looking for anything that came within our reach. And Roman grain ships disappeared from the Mediterranean. It was no longer a Roman sea. It was our sea, the Sea of the Vikings. With no grain ships coming into Rome, what happened to the Romans? They starved. Your countryside was empty. Your cities were empty. Italy was empty. Let's compare that with the United States today. Today, we have had a conquest. When this country was founded, this beautiful, beautiful flag, the Stars and Stripes, our founders borrowed money from the banks. The borrower is servant to the lender. This represents a symbol representing nothing. It should be a green flag with a dollar symbol on it. This is subservient to its master. In 1911, we officially gave the okay to the Federal Reserve System, and the system of taxation was instituted called tribute. And as long as you pay tribute, they won't come and throw you in prison and confiscate your business and take everything you have and take one stone down from another as long as you pay tribute. You can talk and you can complain as much as you want, but if you don't pay tribute, they will smash you like a worm. And don't you forget it. And they've got the army of the United States to back up all the local law officials if necessary. Today, the world owes our New York bankers. Everywhere, people are trying to make it, to pay the interest. And wheat is pouring in to Rome, the new Rome, America. It's pouring in. Over half of our foodstuffs are coming in from abroad. Argentina is planting every acre they can possibly get in the ground. Brazil is clearing the forest and planting it to raise grain, to cut down timber, sell it on the world's markets, to raise anything they can to prevent being foreclosed. Everyone worldwide is raising everything. Their mines are producing everything. And what's happening to prices? What's happened to the wheat price, the corn price, the commodity prices of all sorts? It's collapsing. Now, where have we heard this story before? Exactly as it happened before. There's nothing new. Not here. The Roman farmers were ruined. The American farmers are being ruined. The land were foreclosed. They moved to the cities in Rome. The land's being foreclosed. They're moving to the cities in America. The bankers owned everything in the Italian peninsula. The land grew up in trees. The bankers own everything in America. The land is growing up in trees. In Rome, there was free bread. In America, there's free bread. Next, the ships, the grain ships coming to America, will have to pass through the sea lanes. And our granddaddies are not out there today. Our grandfathers, the Vikings, aren't out there. But there will be other ships to intercept the grain ships. And when those grain ships are stopped, the cities will stall, if the future follows the past. Real estate bargains. I've had a lot of inquiries about real estate bargains in the days ahead. In 1775, things were absolutely awful in the state of Virginia. Plantations were for sale for whatever they would bring. Money had virtually disappeared. It was the bottom, the very bottom of the cycle and the beginning of the war cycle. Prices went on up until 1814. You could have bought a plantation in Virginia for as little as an equivalent of $1,000 today. That very same plantation in 1814 would have been at the equivalent of $60,000. That same plantation in 1814, if you had tried to sell it in 1843 at the bottom of the cycle, commodity cycle, would have brought less than $1,000. The same plantation, if you had held it till 1864, probably 1860 would be better, would have brought in the neighborhood of $75,000 to $100,000. That same plantation, if sold in 1896, would have brought, probably, if you were extremely fortunate, $1,000. I'm talking about the same land now. I know we live on the land. I know what land prices were. If held until 1920, you could have probably gotten $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 for that plantation. If held till 1933, you would have been very fortunate indeed to have gotten $8,000 to $10,000 for that plantation. If held till 1980 or 81, it would probably have brought $1.5 million. Now, land values in Virginia have not collapsed as they have in the Midwest, but they will in time. The Midwest is a depression area. The coastal areas on the west and eastern coast hardly know there's a depression on. They will learn in time. So right now, it's not just to use a Virginia plantation for an example. However, land prices have come down 1/3 in Virginia, whereas they've come down 2/3 in many other parts of the nation. City land and city values tend to hold their values until the very last minute. Land values, commodity prices peaked in 1980 and started down. At that time, the manufacturers could buy commodities cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. In other words, their profit margins grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And consequently, the stock market went higher and higher and higher, just as in 1929. In 1920, commodity prices peaked and went down. Manufacturing profits went higher and higher and higher, and they collapsed in 1929. At some point in this advance, we can expect a collapse. When? I don't know. In my opinion, I think we have seen probably the end of the pre-election correction for this four-year cycle. It should be followed by good news and another rush to the top. And this could be the final rush for the stock market. I have questions about the coming bank war. Banks are a brand new phenomenon on the American scene. We have very little experience with banks. Prior to 1780, we had no banks at all in America. This comes from my book on page 179, War Cycles, Peace Cycles. It shows the creation of the banks in America. In 1780, we had 2. In 1800, we had 20. In 1814, we had 250. In 1860, we had 1,601. In 1921, we had 31,076. And then they started bankrupting and collapsing as one bank gobbled up on another. And they went all the way down to 14,000 in 1932, and they have stayed at that number ever since. Banking is a monopoly. It is run by the big banks. They let out franchises for small banks, little small country banks that only have a billion or two in assets. At such time as they desire, the big banks can set in place regulations that the little banks cannot comply with. And when that time comes, the big banks move in and take over the assets of the little banks and then give the franchise to someone else and let them go out and put other people in debt. And then they will come at some point in the future and take them. The question, how do the banks control the media? The banks control this country because the borrower is servant to the lender. They have seen to it that their hired mercenaries in Congress have passed laws that are suitable to them. One of the laws that has been passed is this, a very simple one. The inheritance tax. It was done at the bequest of the banks. In order to get around taxes, those with large estates set up trust. They mostly assign people, let banks manage the trust to save a lot of paperwork. A law has been passed which allows the banks to vote all stocks held in trust. Therefore, who actually controls the company? You or your descendants may own the stock and may get all the dividends from the stock, but who votes that stock? It's the bank. Who elects the directors for corporations in America? The banks. How much does it take to control a bank? Something like 10% of the stock. That's all that's necessary. Did you know that banks in America control between 45 and 50% of all the stock of all the corporations in America? More than 5 times the amount of stock necessary to control it? Who then controls America's corporations? The banks. Who gives the colleges bequest? The corporations. Who controls the corporations? The banks. If you have a conservative college, will the corporations give conservative colleges money? No. If you have a liberal college, will they give them money? Yes. So, if a college has a conservative professor, will they elevate him to a chair and make him a head of a department? Not if they're smart. They'll probably end up putting him over in a corner somewhere or firing him if they expect to get millions of dollars from American corporations. The radio and television and newspapers of the United States are stock companies. Who controls the stock companies? Most stock companies are controlled by the banks. Who controls your media? The banks. It's extremely important. If you control the media, you then control the politicians. George Washington on a white horse could ride through town and you'd never know it unless the media decided to carry the story. If they decided to give George Washington publicity, they could elect him president. If they decided to have a blackout on George Washington could not be elected dog catcher. Who controls politics in America? The media. Who controls the media? The banks. Now, you have to know these things. If you don't know them, you're liable to make a mistake in judgment. The politicians are not free agents. The borrower is servant to the lender. They will do what they're ordered to do, and nothing more. America is against forced busing. We have forced busing. America is against unlimited immigration. We have unlimited immigration. America is against giveaways. We have giveaways. It makes absolutely no difference what America wants. It's what the rulers of America want. That's what America will get. How do we get around this? How do we continue existing? How do we get our point of view across? The way we've always done it. The same way we did it in the 1830s, in the 1820s. We have camp meetings. At a camp meeting, you have groups of speakers like they did in the 1820s and 1830s. Lots of them. Did you agree with all those camp speakers? No, indeed. But you heard them, and people went sometimes for days and sometimes even for weeks. And sometimes they had a never-ending one that went on all season long. As people would leave, other people would come. And there would be 20, 30, and 40,000 people at some of those camp meetings in Virginia. What do we have here? We have a camp meeting. There's nothing new under the sun. It has all been said or done before. Do we have newspapers? We've got newspapers. Do we have an alternate media? We've got an alternate media. I've got a newsletter. Most of the churches have newsletters. Most of the speakers here have newsletters. You're getting news that no one else has. Based on that news, all sorts of things are different. For instance, I know a great deal of Virginia. I've traveled it. My people are buried in it. I hike it. I go over it. And I thought I knew Virginia. And a cousin of mine said, there is a tree I ought to see. I've seen trees. I've seen all sorts of trees. But this is an oak tree. I've seen all sorts of oak trees of all descriptions, species, sizes. This is a special oak tree. It's on a boundary line of 3 counties, and no one knows to whom it belongs. Each of the counties claim it. They have always claimed it. They have claimed it for almost 400 years. This must be some tree. You go back in Virginia over the old plantations that are now grown up in trees, far back by Compass into King and Queen County, and you will come to a tree. It's an oak tree, like other oak trees, but not like other oak trees. This tree towers over all other trees, not by half, not by twice. And I've seen the giant oaks of Virginia. I live in a grove of giant oaks, but I've never seen anything like this. This is 3 times larger than the greatest oak of Virginia. Now I know what a tree will do with 300 to 400 years growth. And I did not know that before. You know things at this camp meeting, and you've learned things that you did not know before. And your oak trees grow and grow and grow. And in time, your lives and things are going to grow and grow and grow. 5 years ago, it would be impossible to have a meeting like this. 5 years from now, this entire building won't be big enough to hold it. This is the oak that's growing. Now, these newsletters, if you keep these newsletters, you're doing yourself a disservice and the cause a disservice. Give them to an acquaintance and don't tell him your opinion, because he is as smart as you are, he thinks. Give it to him and ask for his opinion. Your VCR tape, don't keep a VCR tape. It sits and grows dust. You have all sorts of good intentions, but it sits, and you will listen to it once, see it once or twice, and that's all. It'll sit. Give it to someone and ask for his opinion and get it back. And you have probably put the seed that will gain us a convert. Your cassettes that you see all around, don't keep those things. Don't let them stack around. Hand them out to a friend and ask for his opinion. And listen very attentively as he says, well, I don't agree to this, and I don't agree to that, and I don't agree to... Oh, that's fine. There might be something in there that he will agree with. And you are that much ahead. And the next tape, he might only find 2 things wrong with it instead of 4 or 5 things, right? And by the time you get to the 4th, 5th, or 10th cassette, you have separated another supporter of the Babylon system, and you've separated him away from Babylon. And he's in our camp because our army is growing. When will the crash come? I've just covered that. Sometime, I think commodity prices will reach the bottom between 1988 and 1992. When will we go to war? When commodity prices top and start down, that's called the peace cycle. There's always a small brush fire going somewhere. I suppose there always will be. But it is extremely difficult to get a major war started. At the bottom of the commodity crash, and when commodities start up again, that's the beginning of the war cycle. In order to get things started and to force the nation to borrow money, because no one voluntarily borrows money, to force the nation to borrow money into existence, a national emergency will be started. The victim has already been picked out. I told everyone in 1980 that, you know, we're running out of people. I'm sorry, South Africa, but it looks like you elected, you see. If not South Africa, maybe some of these Arab states, but primarily South Africa. When will that take place? I think sometime following 1992. The prohibitions against war. We are under law. We are different. You owe allegiance. You owe me nothing. You owe everything to your God. You're under his command. And you are a priest as much as I am a priest. We have our own little ministries, each one of us here. You are by far the best educated people that have ever gone to a meeting, a religious meeting, that has ever met in North America at any time. And you should realize that. The time is going to be called on when your expertise is going to be needed. Here are the rules on war with the kinsman. Thou shalt not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people. Leviticus 19:18. I require you to abstain from shedding the blood of men. Antiquities 1:1-2. Now look, Antiquities was written by Josephus. It's a compendium. It's another Bible. It takes excerpts out of all the other books of the Bible, from Genesis to all the other books. It's just another excerpt. We've got Enoch, the book of Enoch. It's a compendium of the Bible, like our King James Version. But each one of these compendiums, when you chuck it away, you chuck away a lot of filler, things that fill in the cracks and make sense out of things. Study these little compendiums and fill in your King James Version of the Bible and fill it out. People don't argue with Antiquities. They don't argue with Josephus. He calls himself a Pharisee. There are stacks and stacks of letters in the back of the book saying he's the best Christian there ever was, and why the 16 different reasons why he was an early Christian, and so forth and so on. Read Josephus. Read the compendiums. They are certainly a help. Blessed is the man who does not direct his heart with malice against any man. Enoch 44:3. Man, Adam. Adam. They forced the Jews. Now I'm using the Roman interpretation of the word Jew. To them, anyone who lived in that province of Judea was a Jew. To a Galilean, that was not so. To a person who lived in Jerusalem, who was an Israelite, that was not so. To them, anyone who lived in Samaria was a Samaritan. Anyone who lived to the south was a Judean, a contemptible Judean, a Jew. You have to know the source of the speaker, where he's coming from. A Roman speaks of the Jew, meaning everyone. A Galilean says a Galilean or a Jew or a Samaritan. Know the identity of the speaker when you use these words. Josephus is the one who said they forced the Jews. Now he was using the Roman interpretation because he wrote for the Romans. The Romans had just torn the guts out of Jerusalem and the whole land of Judea. And he was very nice to the Romans. They forced the Jews that were among them to bear arms against their own countrymen, which is unlawful for us to do. I've run across that time and time again in the other compendiums. Endure for the sake of the Lord, because the Lord will be your avenger, that there be no avenging here among men. Enoch 50:4-5. He who vents anger on any man, the Lord's great anger will cut him down. Enoch 44:2-3. Here's from Antiquities 4:8-45. In case one of their own blood should attempt to confound or dissolve their constitution of government, God's laws, they should take vengeance on them, both all in general and each person in particular. That if they were not able to take such vengeance, such as we in the United States, we can't take vengeance on these people who violate the law, they should still demonstrate that what was done was contrary to their wills. Now, is that good sense or not? You can't go out and cut down an adulterer or a murderer or put him to death as the Bible requires him to be put to death. But at least you can say it's against the law to allow a murderer to live. It is against the law to allow a sodomite to live. When any person would compel us to break our laws, then it is that we choose to go to war against Apia 2:38. South Africa can demand her rights of protection against her own kinsmen. South Africa should call on the law to protect her against her own kinsmen. And we, as kinsmen, are forbidden to go to war against South Africa, our own flesh and blood. We are forbidden to raise our hands against our own flesh and blood. Ever again, that there should ever be a revolutionary war, a war between the states, World War I, World War II, a bloodbath when we kill our own by the tens and tens of millions and bomb them and incinerate women and children. It violates our law. And those that would require us to violate the law, it is then we choose to go to war. I wanted to get into the killing of Farmer Kirk. Other people can do that. I've talked to the widow. I talked to people who were present on the ground. There are books available, and you can do that, and do that very well. So I won't get into that right now. But there's one thing I would like to get into. Letting other people talk for you. I got a letter that I tried to answer in my newsletter. It said, Mr. Hoskins, what do you know about Israel, British Israel? Does it have anything to do with identity? Is there anything in the Bible about it? Signed by a W.H. from Pennsylvania. I answered, editor, sure, Christians believe the Ten Commandments. Pseudo-Christians quote scripture to the effect that the law applies to Israel only. And since they aren't Israel, hey, by the way, this is one of their big arguments. Since they aren't Israel, they can go out and do anything they want to, and they are not in violation of God's Ten Commandments in so doing. Any attempt to nullify any of the Ten Commandments is, in the opinion of many, a revision of Scripture and is anti-Christ. Anglo-Israel is a centuries-old British belief that in many respects is similar to the beliefs of Christians in America who have been given the name identity by the press. Some Americans, believers, take exception to some of the claims of Anglo-Israelites, as well as the name identity, but not about the following Bible scriptures referred to in the following quote from the Jewish Encyclopedia, entitled Anglo-Israelism, page 600. Quote from the Jewish Encyclopedia. Anglo-Israelism, a theory which identifies the Anglo-Saxon race with the lost 10 tribes. Strictly speaking, the believers do not form a sect, as most of its members retain communion with the Church of England, and they only hold their views as a supplementary pious opinion. The theory of Anglo-Israelism is based on an extreme literal interpretation of the Old Testament. You see, Jews are forbidden to quote the law from the Old Testament. They are forbidden by the Talmud to do this. As represented by the King James Version, that England and its colonists must be the Israel to whom the promises were made in the Bible. It is pointed out that while in the prophecies Israel will change his name, Hosea 1:9, be numberless, Hosea 2:1, dwell in the islands, Isaiah 24:15, with colonies and be the chief of the nations, Micah 5:8. Judah will be a byword, Jeremiah 15:4. The isles be north, Jeremiah 3:12, and west, Isaiah 24:15, of Palestine, and be in a cold climate, since it is said, heat nor sun will smite them, Isaiah 49:10. It was further prophesied that the isles would become too small for Israel, Isaiah 49:19, and that Israel should become a nation and a company of nations, Genesis 35:11. It would therefore have colonies, Isaiah 49:20, so that it might surround the nations, Deuteronomy 32:7 through 9, and be above them all. It goes on, but this is from the Jewish Encyclopedia. Let your friends look up the quotations themselves. I think they will find those quotations most interesting indeed. In closing, I would like to say this. We are on the winning side. We must be moderate in our speech. We must always remember that God rules, and God's victory is absolutely sure. Thank you.
This program has been brought to you by America's Promise and is available on either VHS or beta cassettes. If you would like to be on our mailing list to receive catalogs of updated supporting literature, audio, or videotapes, write America's Promise, Post Office Box 30,000, Phoenix, Arizona 85046.